Real Estate 4BGINERS, your first LEVERAGED investment. Hey, welcome back. I want to start tonight with a belief that used to live in my head and honestly might be living in yours too. For years, I genuinely believed that real estate was only for people who already had money. Big money. People with $200,000 sitting around in cash, just waiting to buy a building. And because I didn't have that, I quietly crossed real estate off the list of things that were possible for me. Not because anyone told me directly that I couldn't do it. I just assumed it, the way so many of us assume things about wealth that were never actually true in the first place. Here's what changed everything for me, and what I want to change for you tonight. Real estate is not built on cash. Real estate, more than almost any other wealth-building tool, is built on leverage. And leverage means something beautifully simple. You do not need to have all the money to control the asset. You need enough to get started, and a plan to let the asset itself carry the rest of the weight over time. Tonight, I want to walk you through real estate the way it actually works for beginners, not the way it looks in some glossy magazine, and not the way fear has probably painted it in your mind either. Let's start with the single concept that makes real estate so different from almost every other investment out there. When you buy a stock, you need the full price of that share. If a share costs $100, you need $100. There's no shortcut. But when you buy a property, the bank, through a mortgage, allows you to control the entire asset while only putting down a fraction of its total value. Maybe 10%, maybe 20%. And the rest, the majority of that asset's value, is being carried by borrowed money. Money that, if the property is generating rental income, is often being paid down by someone else's rent, not entirely out of your own pocket every month. Let that sink in for a second, because it's honestly one of the most powerful financial concepts most people never fully understand. You can control an asset worth $200,000 with a fraction of that amount out of your own savings, and let tenants, time, and appreciation do a significant amount of the heavy lifting from there. Now, I want to be very careful here because I don't want this to sound like some magic trick with no risk attached. It's not magic. It's a tool, and like every powerful tool, it needs to be used with real understanding, not blind excitement. So let's build that understanding together, piece by piece. The first concept every beginner needs to understand is cash flow. This is simply the difference between the money a property brings in, through rent, and the money that goes out, through the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Positive cash flow means the property is putting money in your pocket every month, even after all the bills are paid. Negative cash flow means you are paying out of your own income just to keep the property running. For a beginner, positive or at least neutral cash flow is almost always the safer, smarter starting point, rather than betting everything purely on the hope that the property's value goes up someday. The second concept is the down payment, and this is usually where beginners feel the most intimidated, so let's clear it up honestly. You do not need the full price of a home in cash. Depending on the type of loan and property, down payments can range anywhere from a small percentage to 20% or more. This means your first step isn't saving an impossible mountain of money. It's saving a specific, calculated, much smaller amount, tied to a specific, realistic property goal. The third concept is the mortgage itself, and I want you to think about a mortgage differently than you probably have before. A mortgage on your own personal home is often, at least until it's paid off or rented, functioning more like a liability since it's not producing income. But a mortgage on a property that's generating rental income becomes something else entirely. It becomes a tool that lets tenants, essentially, pay down your asset for you, month after month, while you build equity in the background. The fourth concept, and one beginners often overlook, is the reserve fund. This is money set aside, separate from your down payment, for the unexpected. A broken water heater, a vacant month between tenants, a roof repair nobody saw coming. Beginners who skip this step often panic at the very first surprise expense, and sometimes that panic leads them to sell too early, before the investment ever had a real chance to grow. A reserve fund is what allows you to stay calm and stay invested through the completely normal bumps that come with owning property. Now, I want to walk you through what a real, beginner-friendly first step into real estate can actually look like, without needing to be wealthy first. Step 1. Get brutally clear on your own numbers. Know your credit score, know your current savings, know roughly what you could realistically save toward a down payment over the next 6 to 12 months. This isn't about dreaming big yet. It's about seeing your real starting point honestly. Step 2. Learn your local market specifically, not in some vague, general way. What do modest properties actually cost in your area or in an area you're open to investing in? What do they typically rent for? This research phase costs you nothing but time, and it will save you from walking into a purchase blind. Step 3. Consider starting smaller than you might initially imagine. A small condo, a modest single-family home, even in some cases, house hacking, which simply means living in one part of a property while renting out another part, letting your tenants help cover your own mortgage while you learn the ropes firsthand. Step 4. Get pre-approved before you fall in love with any specific property. This step tells you, in real numbers, exactly what a bank is willing to lend you, based on your actual financial situation, rather than guessing and getting emotionally attached to something outside your real reach. Step 5. Run the numbers on any property before you get emotionally attached to it. What's the estimated rent? What's the estimated mortgage, taxes, and insurance? Is the cash flow positive, neutral, or negative? This step, more than any other, separates beginners who build real wealth from beginners who accidentally take on a financial burden dressed up as an investment. Step 6. Build your reserve fund before you close on anything. Even a modest cushion, set aside specifically for property-related surprises, will protect you from panic decisions during the completely normal bumps every property owner eventually experiences. I want to address the fear directly for a moment, because I know it's sitting there for a lot of you listening tonight. What if something goes wrong? What if the tenant doesn't pay? What if the market shifts? These are real, legitimate concerns, and anyone who tells you real estate is risk-free is not being honest with you. But here's the reframe that changed things for me. Risk isn't something you eliminate. It's something you study, prepare for, and manage, the same way a smart investor manages risk in every other area of life. A reserve fund manages the risk of surprise expenses. Careful cash flow math manages the risk of a bad deal. Starting small manages the risk of being overwhelmed. Every single fear has a corresponding piece of preparation that shrinks it down to something manageable rather than something paralyzing. I want to bring this back to something personal because I think stories land deeper than definitions. Imagine someone who spent years believing real estate simply wasn't for people like them. No family money, no big inheritance, just a regular income and a regular life. And then one day, instead of continuing to believe that old story, they save a modest amount over about a year toward a down payment on a small, modest property. They do the research. They run the numbers carefully. They buy something manageable, not flashy, not impressive on paper, just solid. And slowly, month after month, a tenant's rent begins paying down that mortgage. Equity begins building in the background quietly, without any dramatic moment attached to it. 5, 10 years later, that modest first property has not only paid for a meaningful portion of itself, it's also opened the door to a second property, because the bank now sees a track record, a real history of responsible ownership, sitting right there on paper. That person didn't start with money. They started with a plan, some patience, and a willingness to let leverage do exactly what it was designed to do: build something larger than what their own savings alone could have ever built by itself. I want to leave you with this thought tonight. Real estate was never actually reserved for the wealthy. It only looks that way from a distance because from a distance we only see the outcome, the big portfolio, the multiple properties, the passive income rolling in. We rarely see the very first modest, slightly nerve-wracking step that came before all of it, the saved down payment, the careful research, the first nervous mortgage application. Every single real estate investor you've ever admired had that beginning too, whether or not it ever made it into their highlight reel. So here's your homework tonight, if you want to call it that. Start with your numbers, just your real, honest numbers. Credit score, savings, local market prices. Not to buy tomorrow, just to finally see your actual starting point clearly instead of assuming, the way I once did, that this entire world was somehow reserved for people who started with more than you did. Because the truth is, most of them didn't. They just started with what they had and let leverage carry the rest of the weight from there. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.